And we are recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first in our series of text studies that are supplementing the Jewish Community Relations Council to Bigotry, No Sanction speaker series. Just a little bit about the speaker series. The Jewish Community Relations Council is examining the current crisis in America through its speaker series, To Bigotry, No Sanction, Jewish Perspectives at the Crossroads of American Democracy and Pathways Forward. Each program will unpack a different aspect of the changing dynamics in our democracy with a focus on what we as citizens can do to strengthen it. Today, I have the honor and privilege of being joined by Rabbi Karen Thomashow, who is originally from Worcester, Massachusetts. Am I pronouncing that right? Great. She attended college at Brandeis University, where she majored in sociology and minored in social policy and Near Eastern and Judaic studies. Rabbi Tamasho earned her rabbinic ordination from at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, here in Cincinnati. From 2007 to 2013, Rabbi Thomashow was an assistant and then an associate rabbi at Holy Blossom Temple in Toronto, Canada. And in 2013, Rabbi Thomashow returned to Cincinnati to join the rabbinic staff of Wise Temple. She currently serves as the rabbinic co-chair of NOAM, the North American Association of Reform Moalim, and serves as the chair of the Greater Cincinnati Board of Rabbis. Rabbi Thomashow, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. This is really a privilege.
I guess I should also introduce myself. My name is Ross Levy. I am currently a fifth-year student at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, here somewhat in Cincinnati. I am currently coming to you live from Nashville, Tennessee, but so it goes in these pandemic times. So for our text study today, we are going to be looking at a couple of letters written by thought leaders, religious scholars from across the country as part of the Values and Voices project. And Rabbi Thomashow, it was your wonderful idea to take a look at these letters. And I was hoping you could give us a sense of what led you to that decision and what you think we can gain from reading these.
Sure. So this is a project called 100 Days, 100 Letters. This is actually the second iteration of the project. It began as a national campaign of what they're calling American values and religious voices. So this intersection, which I think we're going to be speaking about today, of religious values and morals and thought intersected with American politics, and whether it's nationalism and populism, which I know just took place in the conversation as a part of the series that you just beautifully introduced. And so here we have religious leaders from all across the country and the spectrum of religions who are speaking to that intersection. And it was the brainchild, as I understand, of the provost of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and that is Rabbi Andrea Weiss. So I thank her actually for the inspiration. And now we are going to present two of the letters that are addressed to President Biden, Vice President Harris, and members of the 117th Congress.
Great. Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So I will read the letter that you've chosen. And for those following along at home, we've included links to the letter. So please follow along with us as we're discussing, as we're reading through. This letter, it was written by Rabbi Dr. Joshua Garraway, a graduate of the Cincinnati campus of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, who is currently a professor at HUC JAR in Los Angeles, also serves as a professor at the University of Southern California. And he writes, "Dear President Biden, Vice President Harris, and members of the 117th Congress, almost 800 years ago, a small community of German Jews faced a problem. Their town barely had a minyan, the 10 adults required for communal prayer. When major holidays came around and a townsperson or two celebrated with family in another city, the town struggled to muster 10 men for its own observance. So the townspeople wondered, does Judaism allow the community to compel a person to remain in town to make a minyan? This question was put to Germany's leading rabbi at the time, Meir of Rothenburg. He argued that the community does have such power because communal prayer constitutes a tzorech gadol, a great need. He noted that Jewish law similarly permits a town to force the baker to keep the bakery open on the eve of a festival so that residents have fresh bread for their celebrations. Sometimes the needs of the community prevail over individual liberty. The rabbi added a caveat, however. If a town has 11, not 10 Jews, it may not prevent a person from leaving out of fear that one of the remaining 10 might fall ill and deplete the quorum. Having the extra person available to make the minyan is helpful, but not essential. Coercion may at times restrict liberty, in other words, but only when it is absolutely necessary. While the struggles of a medieval town might seem remote from the concerns of a modern nation of more than 250 million citizens, the basic tension between communal need and individual freedom rests at the heart of a country whose constitution aims to, quote, promote the general welfare, unquote, but also to, quote, secure the blessings of liberty, unquote. Many Americans fear that the balance in recent years has tilted toward the state and that liberty has been unduly compromised by the government's power to tax, to police and incarcerate, to regulate business and trade, and so on. The restrictions resulting from the pandemic have exacerbated these concerns. As we look ahead to the scourge lifting and normalcy returning, I urge you to consider the wisdom of Rabbi Meir. Use the coercive power of the state cautiously to meet the great needs of the public, while ever safeguarding our inalienable and divinely endowed right to be free. Sincerely, Joshua D. Garraway. So first, let me just ask, what was it that drew you to this letter, and what were aspects of it that really spoke to you?
Well, first of all, it's so meaningful to me to see a real life example. I love this story because it really puts in perspective that even the challenges of the day, the individual coercion versus the greater good and liberty of the country, is not a new idea. And so that is very important to me. I think even as Americans, we can remember that we can look at other examples from even other countries to guide our decisions and to guide our conversations. The second thing that just means so much to me are two lines that I'm going to pull out of what Dr. Garraway said, which is first, sometimes the needs of the community prevail over individual liberty. And second, coercion may at times restrict liberty, but only when absolutely necessary. And I think that the tension between these two realities is something that we are struggling with at this moment. There is no question whatsoever. And I've been thinking about it not only in the context of the pandemic, but even around voting. There's so much division in our country. And when do we go into the ballot box and make a decision that's based only on our personal needs? And when do we make a decision based on the needs of the community?
Absolutely. And to speak to what you were lifting up a little bit earlier, I think that's one of the amazing things of Jewish tradition and having access to this plurality of voices from across history and in different places, is that we can sort of step outside of our particular context and look at things through a different lens or through different eyes. And it's kind of funny because I think that both of the letters that we each chose really hone in on this question of communal need versus individual liberty. And And it's interesting to me, at least, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, how Dr. Garraway ties in this notion of the inalienable and divinely endowed right to be free, which I would say is not as would not have factored into the thinking of Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, but he ties it into the American context so seamlessly, and it's one of those self-evident things that we take for granted. And so, in that sense, he's balancing this need for individual liberty with the needs of the community, even as individual liberty maybe would not be the language that Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg might use.
It's interesting because I do agree with you. I doubt that he would have maybe, especially not used it in term of inalienable, right? These are references from American political history. But at the same time, I think that there is a continuum that this tension raises. And I think that there has always been extremism and extreme understanding, both in behavior and in thought. So what we see here is about thought, that if we are to absolutely coerce others for a long period of time and to the diminishment of their own ability to breathe or to live, then that's an extreme. And at the same time, the opposite extreme is full freedom, right? This idea that you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, to whomever you want, and those impacts are not considered. So these are the extreme edges. And I think that he understands that, Rabbi Meir, and says, okay, there's both. And they're not just extremes, I should say, because there are times to be free, but freedom alone is an extreme. And the same is what we're learning here is there are times, and I wouldn't even use the word coercion, I'd say there are times to be considerate of others, right? And therefore, sometimes being considerate alone certainly would be an extreme, but being considerate in a time, that's not an extreme at all. And again, I think he's pulling us toward the middle of this tension.
Absolutely. And where we're sitting right now, as we're talking, we're fastly approaching Passover. And something that I think about a lot during Passover is, it is a story of redemption. It is a story of freedom, but it's never freedom for freedom's sake. It's always the freedom to obligate and to build a community together. And so the idea is you can't have the redemption from Egypt, you can't have the crossing of the Red Sea and the jubilation and the celebration without that moment of Mount Sinai, which is generally captured in the holiday of Shavuot, where you accept an obligation that it's not just about each of us being individually free, it's about us having the freedom to be able to build a community together, one that cares about each other and that serves the needs of everyone in the community.
Thank you for mentioning Pesach or Passover. And probably, to be honest, this may be why I chose this. I think it's on my mind, as it is on many of our Jewish minds at this time. And I'm thinking of two brief things. One is, in a former congregation that I served, there was a phrase that was shared by the daily minyan, to use the same term, or actually service with the quorum in the congregation. And the line was something to the effect of, the journey from Egypt did not make us free until we received the Torah at Mount Sinai. And we know this is a trope of our tradition, that freedom is not freedom in and of itself, but as you said, it's a means to this end of responsibility. And responsibility sometimes means coercion or capitulation or, again, consideration, as I used before. The other small piece I would say is that I've been thinking about this so much when it comes to also one of the rituals of Passover, which is when we say the 10 plagues in our Seder and we take that little bit of wine out of our cup because we are diminished, right? Like our freedom meant that there was, I want to use the right term, but maybe there was loss and there was real diminishment of Pharaoh and literally his life and his army. And so we even take a moment and say, our freedom is not that extreme freedom where it's to any end, but to a necessary end, right? And so I see the same tension in that ritual of Passover.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that moment at Sinai sort of highlights that in a lot of ways we do have free will. We do, as human beings, have this ability to make different choices and to decide how we want to live our lives, and yet in order to build holiness and to build a sacred community, that means restricting our free will in certain ways so that the whole can be beneficial, and also understanding that in order for people to truly be free and have that ability to determine their own destinies, there are some sacrifices that we make along the way. And more both in terms of our personal autonomy and also in terms of resources that are allocated for people that will enable them to have that true freedom. Because in order to be free, you also need to eat and be healthy. And yeah, is there anything you have any final thoughts for this letter?
No, I was just going to say that I could probably talk about it forever, but it's my privilege now to read your letter so that you can respond and we can have a second conversation. Thank you for that. Now I'm going to read a letter that is co-authored by Tamara Cohn-Eskenazi, the F.E. Weiss Ox Professor of Biblical Literature and History at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and Jacob L. Wright, Associate Professor of Hebrew Bible at Emory University, the Candler School of Theology. This was written on February 10, 2021. Dear President Biden, Vice President Harris, and members of the 117th Congress, recent events in our beloved country have exposed the frailty of much that we have taken for granted. At this time of crisis, we need courageous and creative leadership. The Jewish Bible, also known as the Old Testament, was born in response to catastrophe and defeat. In the face of devastation, some refused to give up hope and set about the task of reimagining what it means to be a people. In a collaborative effort that is breathtaking in both its scope and creative vision, the biblical authors imagined their separate pasts as one story. They were convinced that their rival communities could join together as one people. In asking what it means to be a people, they rethought every facet of their existence, setting forth a diverse curriculum for a new form of peoplehood. At its center are laws and statutes demanding love for neighbor and stranger. The intuition guiding this project of peoplehood is that a nation is only as strong as its weakest members. A people that fails to establish an equitable economy cannot endure, let alone be free. The line emblazoned on our Liberty Bell, which is from, proclaim liberty throughout the land, comes from the biblical book of Leviticus. Many Americans consider it a call to independence, affirming the privilege of doing as one wishes, as long as it doesn't harm others. However, its biblical meaning is the opposite. Proclaim liberty means recognizing our interdependence and creating a socioeconomic safety net that prevents families from falling into irreversible poverty. At the center of the Torah and as the foundational text of Judaism, the book of Leviticus teaches that true liberty requires a new infrastructure and society, one that ensures that all, both citizen and stranger, have a secure dwelling place and means of livelihood. As Americans, we can aspire to nothing less. We call upon you to act with courage and creativity to establish this kind of liberty for all. This is a sacred task, and you can count on our support. Sincerely, Rabbi Dr. Tamar Cohen Eskenazi and Dr. Jacob L. Wright. So Ross, may I ask you why you chose this particular letter, which is very meaningful, and also what about it is particularly important as we're studying this together?
Sure. I'll start with the second. I really understand this letter sort of in two halves. And it's, if you're looking at the page with us, it's divided by a nice little quote, but I'll address the second half. And it really speaks to the theme that you lifted up from Dr. Garraway's letter of this tension and this continuum between independence and liberty and the idea of, and the importance and idea of freedom, and interdependence, and the communal element of feeling obligated to one another and feeling that call to provide the resources that enable all of us to live and survive and thrive. And then the second part was this first half where it talks about the project of putting together the Hebrew Bible and how it was this ambitious project of re-envisioning what it meant to be a people. And I think that's something that's so important, and it really highlights the importance of the stories that we tell. In a lot of ways, we as Americans have a certain story that we tell that tells us who we are and what we believe in and what brings us together. And the importance of stories is that it does that. It gives us a sense of identity. It gives us a sense of community. And it also highlights the importance that those stories include all different types of voices, and that you're able to bring in diverse voices and diverse experiences. And especially we as Americans coming from so many different places around the world, with such different cultural heritages and experiences, how important it is that we find a way to make room in our story for everyone, and constantly reshape and innovate that story in a way that highlights the best of ourselves. And so seeing the compilation of the Hebrew Bible as this identity formation project definitely spoke to me, and I think it can speak to a lot of how we think about American identity and how we think about our differences and how we can work together better in these coming years.
I also am taken by this first half as a new idea, and I am wondering two things. The first maybe is a comment, and then the second is a question, which is the comment is that I think that so many of us have felt that COVID has been such a traumatic year, and we wouldn't wish it upon our greatest enemy. And yet at the same time, given that it has been a reality, we've also learned a ton from it. And I think we have many silver linings, as some might say. And out of that comment, I want to ask my question, which is that moment of crisis that was described in the Bible as a moment we already have discussed, but is that moment of crisis a parallel in this moment? Do you feel that there is now like an opportunity for American voices to come back together, for our American experience to come back together, given that COVID also happened? It's such a divisive time politically in our context. I'm curious what you think will happen with this voice and what we can learn positively from it.
Yeah, I think I do see it sort of as this moment of crisis, and I guess I'll speak to what I hope will come from it. We as either clergy in training or well-established clergy, we tend to deal in hope and hope to bring that to people. And I think something that I've thought about a lot over the course of this past year, and it's hard to believe that it's been a year, is how these moments of crisis really highlighted and unfortunately exacerbated issues that have been there for a while now. And I think in order for us to move forward, in order for us to come together, there has to be an understanding that these problems that came up and that began to be highlighted, whether it's talking about, I was reading recently how, particularly in the American South, how obesity and heart disease led to really much more adverse side effects from the virus. Or if we're looking at the swell in protests and activism this past summer in support of racial equality, these are issues that have been going on sort of under the surface and growing, but a national, really international crisis like this only highlights them. And I think my hope is that we can learn from that, we can recognize that, and we can do as Dr. Eskenazi and Dr. Wright encourage us to do, which is find ways of placing in better structures that can support people and lift people up and give people the best chances to live good, healthy, happy lives. And that's something that we're all responsible for. It is not just the responsibility of a few. So that's sort of my thoughts on it. I'm curious to hear if you agree or not.
Yes, thank you for this final opportunity to speak. I have been thinking again of the intersection, not only of religion and American politics, but also of Pesach, of Passover. And we're taught, as you know, B'chol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. Every generation is obligated to see ourselves as if we literally left Egypt. So that's physically impossible now that we were in that generation. And I'm thinking the same way about COVID. We've all had COVID this year. Some of us have had the actual virus, but we've all been affected by it. And if we all understand what the impact has been on families who've lost multiple loved ones, or other individuals who've lost jobs and income and financial sustainability, I think that it's one of the greatest exercises. Sorry that it's here, but since it is, it's one of the greatest exercises in compassion, in a consciousness that is collective. And again, with an understanding that it's been the great equalizer. We are all going through this right now, and we are all part of the implications of racism and of political roulette and all the things that we are, as you mentioned, seeing in large ways now. And so my hope, to use your theme, which of course our tradition and our authors suggest, is to say we have this collective consciousness. We are a people. Sometimes we are considerate of others. Other times we enact our own freedoms, but by and large, we're interested in the greater good for our country. And I love that our Jewish values give us that insight into our American experience.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is a very fitting closing thought and a closing word for what I feel has been a fantastic discussion, conversation, and even just the process of planning this out has been really wonderful for us to connect. So I want to thank you so much for giving your time, giving of yourself as part of this project. And we're just so grateful for you, for your voice, and for your leadership in the Cincinnati Jewish community. And speaking personally, your guidance for myself and my classmates along our path through Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. For those of us who are joining virtually sort of after the fact, we hope that it has been a meaningful learning experience for everyone. We hope that it sparks some conversations, maybe if you're watching with family members or with friends. We very much see this as continuing and beginning conversations amongst all of us about how we can best support our country, support our democracy, and move forward in a way that benefits us all. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Rabbi Thomashow, once again, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much, Ross. It's wonderful to have you as an emerging colleague. This has been a privilege.